Conspiracy theories, they're anti-Semitic, apparently, but then what isn't these days? It would be so much quicker to list all the things that aren't considered anti-Semitic than it is to list the things that are. The Anti-Semitism Trust, CST, Full Fact, and a gaggle of others have all teamed up to produce a quick guide on conspiracy theories for members of the UK Parliament and for candidates that could potentially be sitting MPs in the near future. Now, I very much doubt many of the members of Parliament actually need a guide to conspiracies, what with them being up to their neck in a lot of them, but it's been provided nonetheless. It lists all the usuals: COVID, QAnon, Great Reset, 15-minute cities, Ukraine, climate lockdowns, chemtrails, and others. And you won't believe what they've all got in common, well, apart from being provable or openly admitted in many cases. No, they're all anti-Semitic. Yep, this is actually a graphic from the document. See how all the roads lead to anti-Semitism. So if you're in somewhere like, say, Oxford, having a nightmare trying to get to work because of the new 15-minute city travel restrictions, you're probably an anti-Semite. And if you didn't buy the official narrative of the COVID scam, you called out the now openly admitted harms of the fake vaccines, then you're probably thinking you're pretty clever for dodging that injectable iceberg. But nah, mate, you is an anti-Semite. And if you notice planes crisscrossing the skies and turning sunny days into overcast ones, then you might want to check your prejudice, because it seems to be consuming you. And if you've ever used the term NATO proxy war to accurately describe the Ukraine conflict, then you may as well grow yourself one of those silly little moustaches and start goose-stepping around Asda, because you are full of hate, mate. It is disgusting. The term conspiracy theorist has been used with success for many years now to try and discredit those that have seen through the official narrative of anything. And the accusation of anti-Semitism has been used to attack those critical of the Israeli government and the regular mass bombardment and disgusting mistreatment of the Palestinian people they keep under a military occupation. Both of these terms, conspiracy theorist and anti-Semite, are losing all meaning, of course. One reason is because countless mad theories have come to pass, and another is that if you claim everything is hateful or bigoted, then actually nothing is. So instead of people issuing apologies and backpedaling in the face of these accusations, as they always did previously, now they double down. Because if saying that the mass slaughter of innocent people, tens of thousands of people, thousands of children blown to pieces, if saying that's wrong makes you an anti-Semite, then so be it. I don't care, because I would rather be called a meaningless label by an apologist for genocide than actually be an apologist for genocide. And going back to the subject of conspiracy theories, what are they suggesting? That no one conspires? No one gets together to cover something up or commit a crime? Well, why do we have a police force then? Why do we have detectives, CSI departments? Why do investigative journalists exist if no one is conspiring behind the scenes? Because conspiracies happen every single day in every walk of life and every institution, whether it be Blair, Bush, the WMD scam, the sexed up dossier, because that was a conspiracy to take us into a war that killed 1 million+ people, but conspiracies don't exist. The South Yorkshire police conspired to blame Liverpool football fans for the Hillsborough disaster that killed 97 supporters, rather than admit they themselves were the ones to blame for the tragedy. And the mainstream media and the Thatcher government were more than willing to go along with it, printing blatant lies about supporters robbing the victims and even urinating on the police. But there's no conspiracies. See, I thought cloud seeding was a conspiracy theory, but it's openly admitted now. And I thought vaccine injuries and deaths were a conspiracy theory. Oh, that's openly admitted now too. And the Great Reset is a conspiracy theory, but you can literally buy the Bond villain's book entitled The Great Reset on Amazon. Now, I hear all the time, not everything's a conspiracy, mate, and that is true. But how do you know whether it is or not unless you ask the question? Unless you investigate the facts and determine exactly what's going on. Because that used to be what a journalist did. But now they just take the official state-issued narrative, print it as gospel, and attack anyone that doesn't do the same. And that makes the media and organisations producing stupid pamphlets dismissing anyone questioning authority as an anti-Semite. It makes them complicit in any conspiracy against the people, and they should be viewed as the traitors they are. But there is good news. More and more people are waking up, and there is a spiritual revolution coming, and I am all the way here for it. time where journalists are notable by their absence, either too stupid, too complicit, or too scared for their own careers to actually do their jobs, our final guest this evening is a disconcertingly rare example of a real journalist and an investigator. Whitney Webb needs no introduction whatsoever in terms of her credentials, with her work on Epstein, Israel, Big Pharma, the World Economic Forum, building her quite a following. Her latest investigation, published on Unlimited Hangout last month, digs into the carbon credit coup that's being waged on Latin America, but the usual nefarious organisations are there, as you would expect. Whitney is here to explain just what's going on. Whitney, welcome to the show. Your article, Debt from the Sky, is the culmination of a lot of research on your part and that of Mark Goodwin, your colleague. What have you found?
Yeah, so essentially what we're looking at in this article is this effort that they claim is now not operational, but we'll see. Basically, the goal is to have satellites in the sky surveilling protected areas of the global south in order to emit carbon credits that those local communities do not manage, and they will receive funds that they have to use in one of two ways. And this is all via contractual agreements at like the local level, at the municipal level. And the goal is to either have them spend money where they are securitizing, financializing their natural assets through things called nature-based solutions. These include things like debt for nature swaps. And then on the other side of it, they can spend it on approved decarbonization initiatives, which are essentially all around this one family of companies that are attempting to build an intercontinental smart grid for the entire Americas, being North, Central America, and South America. And one of the ambitions of this program is to regionally integrate the Americas through carbon markets and climate finance. And if you remember back how, the European Union started, it was about making a free trade bloc and all of this. And this is a similar effort to economically integrate the Americas and later leading to greater regional and global governance. It's rather openly stated by some of the members of this. And part of it is also to sort of yoke these governments to the idea of what is referred to as the ecological footprint, which is a metric put out by one of the participating groups called the Global Footprint Network. And the Global Footprint Network is very deeply tied to the Club of Rome, which is a pretty controversial organization with deep ties to the earliest days of the World Economic Forum, which has been largely has become rather notorious for being somewhat of a neo-Malthusian group seeking to reduce global population, specifically in Latin America. And so the fact that this particular group is focused on Latin America is very disconcerting. And perhaps most disconcerting of all is the satellite company at the center of this, which is produced by it's run by former contractors for the Pentagon's DARPA, the NSA, the Department of Homeland Security, numerous ties to U.S. intelligence. It's partnered with Peter Thiel's Palantir, which is a contractor for all 18 U.S. intelligence agencies. It's partnered, and actually its satellites are launched by Elon Musk, SpaceX. And the chair of the board is Trump's former Treasury Secretary, now turned venture capitalist with ties to Israeli intelligence, Steve Mnuchin, as well as the former Joint Chiefs of Staff under Trump, which is the head of all the armed forces in the U.S. under Trump, Joseph Dunford. As well as people that are involved in efforts to sort of covertly dollarize Latin America, which is sort of to get them dependent on the dollar as opposed to their own local currencies through the proliferation of dollar-based stablecoins in Latin America. So one of the other people on this board is a man named Howard Lutnick from Cantor Fitzgerald. And Cantor Fitzgerald holds most of the treasuries for the most popular and most widely used stablecoin, Tether, which had has intimate ties to the FTX scandal. It was created by a man named Brock Pierce, who is a known child porn aficionado with ties to Jeffrey Epstein. So there's a lot of weird things going on with this particular group. And so essentially Latin America is going to be surveilled in its, almost in its entirety by the satellite company under the guise of saving the planet. And I don't know, would be completely shocked if Steve Mnuchin, Joseph Dunford, and this guy from Cantor Fitzgerald, as well as Argentina's richest man, sort of like the Jeff Bezos of Latin America, named Marcos Galperin, are all here. I don't think they're here to save the planet. This is a way for U.S. intelligence to deepen and maintain economic control over Latin America, and also through surveillance under the guise of saving the planet. It's definitely a very notorious, or rather a very dystopian effort, I would say. And it's framed, of course, as being altruistic, which a lot of this is, a lot of these style initiatives are framed as, we're helping save the planet, we're helping the global south, or we're banking the unbanked. But in reality, when you start to interrogate these programs a little more, the actual motives are quite different.
Absolutely. And it's amazing the amount of times the same names and the same connections come up, linking into everything. It feels to me like it's basically another attempt in terms of trying to sell it to the people of Latin America as a way of using fear again, like they did with COVID. They do it with wars, with scary bogeymen like Putin and stuff. And it feels like that's what they're doing here with climate change, isn't it? That they're using that fear of the end of the world to get the people of Latin America to agree to basically be surveilled.
But the thing is, this program is being launched, or is the launch of it is being attempted in almost complete silence. And this has been done rather quietly at what the group refers to as the subnational level. So this is going around to different municipalities, having them sign agreements and contracts with members of this alliance. So essentially, no one in Latin America knows this is happening. And I think that's very significant. Because if they did, I think that, whether they're on the left or the right, or whether they believe in the official climate change narrative or not, why would you want this particular satellite company doing this, for example?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's obviously a rather controversial proposal, and the local governments aren't managing the carbon credits at all. They're being traded and sold and custodied and all of this by these other groups. Not the local governments themselves. And also there's an effort to put this entire carbon market infrastructure expressly on the Bitcoin blockchain through a sidechain protocol called Rootstock, which was partnered with this initiative.
See, I may be way off on this, Whitney, but I've always perceived Latin America as a group of nations that tend not to play ball with Western nations that much. Is that the reality? And do you think maybe that's why Latin America is being targeted? I mean, of course, it's got natural resources and things to exploit, but perhaps, by surveilling it and having some control over it, they can try and bring it into line a little bit.
Yeah, well, too, and I don't know if I'd necessarily agree with that characterization, but there is a lot, there's mainly two factions, I would say, more or less, in Latin America, but they're both seeking to sort of impose an European Union style, supranational government over Latin America. And there's groups that are trying to do it from the right. You see this with people like Bolsonaro, with Javier Milei. Bolsonaro not being in power, but when he was, through groups like Mercosur, for example, which is sort of like this EU-style economic integration before governmental integration. And you have these other bodies like Organization of the American States. You have left-leaning regional governments bodies like Aladi and a few others that are all seeking sort of the same thing at the end of the day. But the difference between the factions is whether they're aligned with BRICS, which is, Russia and China and whatnot. And Brazil is, part of that, but there's efforts to sort of move Brazil to this other faction, that other faction being more ruled by Washington, D.C. and the West, traditional West. So, with an election, the governments can switch their allegiances between those two rather quickly. So we all saw this happen in Argentina with the election of Javier Milei, for example. The previous government, before Milei was elected, was trying to create a euro equivalent currency with Lula in Brazil. When he was replaced with Milei, that effort failed, and Milei instead went to the right wing equivalent of those, same regional ambitions, trying to sort of promote this whole idea of the Mercosur, the Southern Common Market, and all of this for these different Latin American countries. So generally in Latin America, you have politicians that follow the same model as everywhere. They're generally very disposed to sell off their countrymen and resources to the highest bidder. And foreign interests, there's just disagreement over which foreign interests they favor, perhaps. But I would argue that what this particular initiative that is the subject of this article, Green Plus, is an effort to really bring Latin America under the dominion in a much more significant way than before, of the United States, and rather this, regionalization effort for the Americas.
Do you think, I mean, you mentioned at the start that they've tried to basically put it on hold or whatever, but, I'm sure they'll revisit it very soon. But can you see it evolving into a situation where it's just another way to get people off the land and into smart cities? So it starts off with the surveillance and stuff like that, and then all of a sudden, some data comes in that says, actually, we've got a problem here. Off you go.
Yeah, that's a very good question. So something that has been noted by the UN as it relates to carbon markets, but on which there is no international consensus, is this idea of carbon rights. And so in this gray area of carbon rights, the questions that arise from that include things like, when you buy a carbon credit, do you become the owner of the carbon that is represented in that carbon credit? So, for example, if you buy a carbon credit that's linked to a Colombian rainforest and you become the owner of that carbon credit, do you then own the carbon, the rights to the carbon sequestered in the trees in that particular plot of rainforest that corresponds to that carbon credit? Some people think the answer is yes, which of course, you start selling carbon credits off. It's a way to covertly land grab. And there's a lot of these efforts that are cleverly disguised land grabs within climate finance under different names. The oldest effort or mechanism for this is the debt for nature swap. They've also been called debt for climate swaps. There's efforts to create all sorts of new financial projects under the guise of conserving nature or combating climate change, which are basically about, securitizing the natural world. I've written about this before in the context of natural asset corporations, but there's efforts to also create things like old growth forest bonds and all sorts of things like that. And the goal is to have it all be on blockchain and, tokenized so they can be easily traded. And this is, one of the major ambitions of people like Larry Fink, who is now, a big proponent of the Bitcoin ecosystem under certain metrics only, of course. And is also promoting the need to put literally every financial product on blockchain, so that it can be easily tradable and give it, a unique digital ID. So it's all part of this, system that's been created, under the guise of under the auspices of the UN, for example. But there's a lot more going on here as well. There's like efforts also by the UN, the World Bank, and some of these other groups to institute what they call a climate wallet that would interface with digital ID and a presumed, CBDC digital wallet and have it interface with this carbon credit system. Recently, in just the past couple of days, we've had Christine Lagarde of the ECB say that the entire financial system needs to be rewired for climate change. And she's not the only one saying that. You have the head of climate finance at the UN, Mark Carney, former head of the Bank of England and Bank of Canada, and former Goldman Sachs guy, also saying similar things. Larry Fink is saying similar things. The banker consensus is that the entire global economy has to be remade. And one of the main pillars of that new system they wish to impose on us is the carbon market, which they currently refer to as the voluntary carbon market. But like digital ID, it will be voluntary in name only. And so, the question is, how do you participate in the market? Are you going to be the person buying up the carbon credits? Are you going to have that capital? Or are you going to be selling off your carbon credits or selling off, your land and your resources, trying to monetize them in order to have some sort of, greater capital in this new system they're making? Because obviously, given the people that are creating this new system and the architects, it's going to be rigged in their favor. And so, they're going to be the ones that are more effectively able to offset, their carbon footprints and whatnot, and able to live normal lives. And the rest of us will be, have to jump through all of these hoops and whatnot. But what we're having right now is the sort of early days of the carbon market. And so these people are trying to consolidate control of the infrastructure and a lot of the, what they suspect, I suppose, would be some of the most important and most lucrative carbon credits. So this particular group, in partnering with the, a majority of municipalities in Latin America, is going to exercise extreme control over possible carbon credit issuances in the entire continent. So it seems like big plays are being made as it relates to, these efforts to create this new financial system that we're being told time and again by these people they are planning to make and impose upon us.
It's moving so quick now, and I'm just thinking it's not going to be long till I'm volunteering as tribute or something. It is, honestly, it is like watching the Hunger Games play out. Can you see the people of Latin America, though, say, it gets to a point where they use, this surveillance to say, right, off the land, or they, use these carbon credits to say, actually, I own this land now, off you go, that they will actually go and they will actually put up with it, or that there will be some kind of revolution?
I think it really depends on what country and what community you're talking about. So, as far as, exploiting people and resources in Latin America goes, when you're, the most vulnerable in countries like Peru, Colombia, and others, when they've been targeted, they're essentially voiceless minorities, a lot of them, and they have no way to really, negotiate or try and protect what's theirs. And oftentimes, the militaries will be brought in against, these relatively vulnerable and voiceless people for the benefit of multinational mining corporations, for example. So, it really depends. It would really have to be sort of like a very significantly wide movement. And unfortunately, especially in the post-COVID era, there was this big effort to onboard everyone onto smartphones and cashless this and digital everything. And a lot of people have become, kind of mesmerized and much more docile, I would say, in Latin America after the COVID situation and everything and its impacts here. I would hope that there would be pushback. I live in Chile, and there is a good amount of pushback and efforts to start mining in southern Chile. But, it depends, because a lot of the people that are looking to mine and extract and exploit are the most powerful people in the world, and view, lithium, cobalt, and a lot of these other minerals that can be found in Latin America or in the Andes specifically, as essential to their ambitions for net zero 2030 and the electric vehicle, quote unquote, revolution. And all sorts of these things. So, ultimately it comes down to the awareness of the people and the willingness of the people. And, I would like to be optimistic, but I think it's going to be something that is going to have to take place on a much larger scale than just one or two or maybe a handful of local communities. There needs to be awareness at a much wider level.
Of course. Well, that's where you and your work come in. Whitney, just finally, because I'm always
Hopefully
interested in your take on things, because, well, you're just very good at what you do, and you also cross the T's and dot the I's. I see a lot of people on social media, whatever, they will think something and they'll say it. They're quite reactionary, and whilst I have respect for that sometimes, because there is a place for it, I think the fact that you kind of tend to sit back a little bit and kind of analyze all the bits and bobs and think about things a bit more. With that in mind, when you look at the world now, with the climate coup, you're obviously just talking about the threat of war. We've got the Prime Minister of Slovakia who's been shot, just a few minutes ago, I think. The pandemic treaty coming in with the World Health Organization. It feels like everything's coming to a head at once. What are your thoughts on the state of play globally?
Yeah, so there's as you pointed out, there's a lot of different moving parts right now. A lot of things are coming together. I think ultimately there's certain policy agendas that we know they're going to go forward with, and that those are the things to watch out for, because ultimately they could use any of these different things at play, or one of them, or a handful of them, to try and force us into that ultimate, what their goals are, essentially. So, in focusing on what may happen to get us there, I prefer to focus on where they're trying to take us, because that's something that we can look at, document, and it's very clear. And that may help us, help more effectively resist the psyops that we are being barraged with to try and get us to consent to all of this. And of course, one of the main things here is to basically do what they did during COVID with vaccine passports, impose digital ID on everyone, because that is the foundation for the whole Sustainable Development Goal, or Agenda 2030 agenda, which is about remaking every aspect of our lives for global technocracy. Among other things. And so, there's a big effort right now that I've been focusing on in some of my articles, efforts to manufacture consent, for example, in the US for a biometric entry-exit system under the guise of tackling illegal immigration. And this is happening in other places in the world as well. And I would argue that what's going on there is an effort to convince the populist, right-leaning populists in the U.S. To support digital ID, which they were against during the COVID era. And there's a lot of other efforts to do that as well, whether it's, trying to sell it as necessary for voter identification when you could continue using the same IDs that people have used before, or use physical IDs as opposed to digital IDs. And I think a big part of that is because they need to psyop us and manufacture consent for these policies, because they won't work without our compliance and our obedience to them. And so, what happened in COVID was a big test for a lot of that. But obviously, they've learned lessons from that, and we should have as well. And we need to focus on not complying with these various policy goals and not onboarding to these various systems they're going to try and force us onto, and find ways to live independently from them. Because whether it's, war or famine, they could try and offer what they're doing now with the World Food Program's Building Blocks program. If you want rations, humanitarian rations, you want to be able to eat. If you're a refugee, you have to scan your eyeball and pay with a digital wallet linked to your biometrics. It essentially operates the same way as Sam Altman's WorldCoin, which is being, foisted on people in Latin America right now that are in places that are, experiencing a lot of economic desperation, like Argentina specifically. And that could be one way they try and onboard people. They could be saying we need everyone to have. We need to know who everyone is for everyone's safety, coming at it from the safety angle, or we need to, everyone
Mass
has
immigration.
to have digital ID to get online, to stop hate speech, to stop terrorism before it happens. I mean, there's infinite number of narratives they could use. They could use, they're talking about the bird flu thing right now. They could try and just do what they did during COVID and go back to vaccine passports and try and get digital ID that way again. I think they're considering that if one of those doesn't work, maybe they'll do all three or do more. But ultimately, the goal is to get us onboarded to digital ID. So we should keep our eyes on that and resist that at all costs and refuse to comply, regardless of the justification or the selling points or the psyops. We should know that that is the thing to be resisted, because once that system is in place, they can essentially do everything they want. They have their social credit paradigm. They have complete surveillance control. And, that's ultimately what the goal of a lot of these policy agendas are. And of course, digital ID is intimately folded into the idea of digital programmable and surveillable money, whether it's a central bank digital currency or the efforts by the private commercial banks to issue CBDC equivalents, which doesn't get enough airtime, in my opinion, because they're definitely doing that as well. But ultimately, it's to have force upon people a programmable, surveillable existence. And that is what we should be focusing on and resisting. And there's a lot of efforts to have us focused on one piece of the different puzzle, or one of the possible avenues that they will use to try and, scare us really into onboarding into these systems. But if we keep our eyes on what the policy agenda is, we can avoid a lot of those things that are sent intentionally to distract us or to unsettle us or to make us afraid, and focus on resisting and not complying.
Yeah. So they'll keep revisiting it and we'll just have to keep batting them away. That's fine. That works for me. So I would urge people at home to check out Unlimited Hangout and Whitney Webb on Twitter, X, whatever it's called. I can never get used to it. Thank you so much for joining us, Whitney. It's always an absolute pleasure to talk to you. The world's mad, but we don't have to be, do we?
No, not at all. Thanks very much, Gareth.